Hello everybody, welcome to Asura Psych. I'm Asura, and today we're going to be talking about repressed extroverted sensing, and specifically what repressed extroverted sensing tends to mean for the INFJ and INTJ personality types. I'm also going to be discussing a little bit about how I experience repressed extroverted sensing on a personal level as an INTJ. Let's get into it. So to understand repressed extroverted sensing, first one has to be able to understand what extroverted sensing is. And in my opinion, extroverted sensing is the most simple of the cognitive functions because it's quite literally how one experiences physical sensations through their senses. And as INTJs and INFJs have repressed extroverted sensing, they tend to directly ignore physical sensations in preference for their personal subjective interpretations of those sensations. And I know that's a bit of a complicated statement to make, but what that essentially means is that INTJs and INFJs tend to ignore the immediate moment or ignore immediate sensations in favor of how they kind of view the ideas and abstract concepts related to that sensation. And this causes the INTJ and INFJ to generally be somewhat detached and aloof from their immediate environment. You'll notice this when you're out and about, and if you see an INTJ or an INFJ, you'll notice that they tend to be very detached from the immediate moment. In my opinion, they always look like they're lost in thought unless you're actively engaging with them. So if you know anything about INTJ stereotypes, you'll know that INTJs often get poked fun at because they have the death stare. And in my opinion, this can be better described as the 1,000-yard stare or the looking through stare. And what I mean by this is that you'll often catch NI dominant types just kind of staring off into nothingness. And you might even catch them in the middle of a conversation doing this when you say something that sparks their interest. And the reason for this is because NI dominant types prefer to think about one thing at a time on a very deep level. Let's compare and contrast this to extroverted intuition. Extroverted intuition prefers to explore all of the possibilities in a given situation or scenario and really explore everything about it. They want to know everything that can happen. Where introverted intuition prefers to focus deeply on one thing and really deconstruct it. They want to take one idea and do their absolute best to get to the roots, causes, and core of what that idea is. So when INTJs and INFJs kind of put up this sensory blind system they have, they're doing their best to ignore the rest of the world to really get to the root of what they're thinking about. And when you see an INTJ or an INFJ disassociate from a conversation, it's likely that a lot of people would think of that as rude, but to them it's just this very natural process. Because if they start to think about something and then they're unable to finish that thought, that's kind of stressful to them. That's what that repressed extroverted sensing is like for them, when they're unable to come to a conclusion about the idea that they have because so much else is going on around them. And so much else could be something as simple as you finishing your conversation when they have an idea that they really want to chase in their head. So that's repressed extroverted sensing in its normal state, in its everyday way of engaging with the world. But what does repressed extroverted sensing look like when an INTJ or INFJ falls into what's called the grip, or when that repressed function temporarily takes control? And for a lot of INTJs and INFJs, it's going to present itself as over or under indulgence in sensory stimulus. This could be over or under eating. This could be temporary drug or alcohol abuse. This could be sensory pleasures, something to do with sexual activity. A lot of these things that involve high sensory stimulus are going to be things that people with repressed extroverted sensing might be likely to engage in for short periods of times in high burst levels. In my opinion, NI dominant types are very unlikely to fall into addiction, but are very likely to temporarily binge sensory stimulus in levels that aren't healthy. I've suffered with overeating my entire life, and you may not be able to tell from looking at me now, but I actually used to weigh 300 pounds. And when I began to learn what MBTI was and how repressed extroverted sensing presented itself, I began to really take note of how that affected me in the long term, and I tried to start dealing with stress in a different way. That said, I still, as an individual, tend to deal with stress by eating. That's always been my go-to for dealing with stress. Just this past week, I had a cavity filled for the first time in my life, and I went home and I ordered pizza and a bunch of sides, and I ate it all in one sitting, and I was in the bed sick for the whole night because I overate. And that's actually something that probably happens once every couple of weeks for me. and it's something I've always struggled with, and that's kind of that repressed extroverted sensing. I really fall into temporary binges of sensory stimulus, and I think that's probably how a lot of INFJs or INTJs tend to experience that repressed extroverted sensing. Now, the way to deal with this is just to do your best to make note of when you're falling into this state, and that's going to be hard because everybody who has a repressed function is going to struggle with it from time to time. But as long as you can begin to notice it and don't allow it to take over your life completely, you can really begin to make huge changes in your life. Like I lost 130 pounds when I really began to take note of how that repressed extroverted sensing was influencing my daily life. All right, that's really all I have for repressed extroverted sensing with INTJs and INFJs. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you learned something new. This has been Asura at Asura Psych. Have a good one.